let me describe your school for you. You've got rewards, you've got sanctions, you've probably got school values. But there's probably one thing you might have overlooked, which is culture. Now, the culture of the school is going to be there whether you cultivated it and designed it or not. So you want to actively design and cultivate the culture. Otherwise, whatever you have is just what exists because of the children. And often, especially in certain contexts, maybe in the playground, maybe in the corridors, that culture has been designed and exists based on the most disruptive children, the loudest children, right? So the culture of your school is just what happens naturally, what children do when they think no one's looking, how it feels, what it sounds like, what it looks like in your school. If someone was to just come in on a random day, if a new child joined, what they would pick up on what's okay and what's not. And that will cause behavior to be an issue, even if you have got sanctions, even if you have got reward systems. And so I'm going to basically break down some of the things you can do to actively bring about this culture, because it's not actually the systems alone. It's not the sanctions as such, but it's what the students do and want to do when no one is watching. Because if you can cultivate a culture in your school where there's a sense of children doing the right thing regardless and wanting to do the right thing, then that's powerful. And if you haven't got that, then the children work against your existing systems, even if you've got them in place. And as I said, culture is the type of thing that shows itself in the corridors, in the transitions, in the playground, in how children speak to staff that they might not know, or even those that they do know quite well. Because, like I said, a culture will be set in your school, whether you're the one who designed it or not. And if you as leadership or the staff team haven't deliberately cultivated this culture and designed it on purpose, it will just exist from what the children have kind of created. So there's a quote you might have heard before, which is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that really is, it was from a businessman, but it applies to schools as well. In that if you can create a culture where everything happens and the children want to buy in to the right ways and the right choices, then that is more powerful than a strategy. But that's only if the culture is good, obviously. Otherwise, it's not better than a strategy that could kind of tighten things up. But also, culture doesn't come about without a strategy. So that's why I say we're going to look at some things that will actively help you to bring about things in your school that are the desired things, okay? So it's important to have policy. Of course it is. But the culture underneath is what's going to really kind of keep that behavior where you want it and maintain it where the children may forget or just not think about the system or the consequences. So this strong culture, it needs to be designed, and then it needs to be consistently implemented. So this is something that's not one strong teacher who manages behavior or one scary member of SLT, but it's a whole staff thing that's implemented consistently. It's what's done every single day. And I usually, when I work with schools, I ask them to go through a kind of simple 3-step process to think through to bring about this culture. And the first thing you want to do is consider your current culture. Just be honest, right? So think about, what does it feel like at the moment? What do children feel like they can and can't do? Like I said earlier, what would a child who hasn't been in the school and joined pick up on? What would they think they can do in the corridors and they can't do? What would they think is okay in the playground? How would they speak, the volume and so on in the classroom? And that's the kind of thing you've got to assess, first of all. Be honest, have a realistic consideration of what your current culture is. Second, you want to identify the culture you want. What do you want your school to look like? And I don't usually tell a school what that is, because that's up to you. Some schools want a culture where it's silent corridors, it's silent transitions, it's silently coming into assembly and silently leaving. Other schools don't want that. They actively want a more relaxed approach. And so you have to decide, what is the culture you actually want in your school? What do you want classroom volume to look like? Classroom attitude, methods? Is it a hand-raising school or not? And so when you have that in your mind, you can then think about how you go from your existing culture to the ideal culture you want. And that's step 3. What are the things you need to do to close the gap between what your culture currently is and what you'd love it to look like? And really, most schools just have step 3, don't they? What are our systems? What are our sanctions? What are our consequences? What are our rewards? And this will be much more powerful if it's done under this intentional consideration of what you want your school to feel like, to sound like, to look like. And it includes the systems, it includes the sanctions, it includes the incentives, it includes all of that. But we have to have step 1 first. What is our current culture? What do we need to improve? What do we want to work on? So step one is the most uncomfortable in a sense, because you've got to be realistic and you've got to look at the negatives essentially, but also bear in mind what is currently good and what currently works, because you also want to keep that and think about how you can actively maintain it. And as I said, make that a part of daily life. And so that step one is really you asking, what would students think about behavior in the school? What do they just instinctively feel like is okay and what isn't? Do they behave only because teachers are there? Do they comply because of consequences and not because they themselves feel this is what we do as a school? Do they wait to be told or told off? Or is there a sense of independence? And so you almost want to get to a point where this is how children behave even if we're not there. If I left the classroom and the behavior stayed exactly the same, that's what I'm aiming for. And step two is obviously your clarity. You're defining that culture that you want. It's not just the behavior that you're prepared to tolerate, right? This is where culture is either strengthened or quietly undermined, right? You define it. You decide where you want the level to be, what's okay, what's not. I'm going to go through a few practical ways that you can actively bring about a culture. And the first one is to make behavior a regular conversation. So as I said, children aren't just learning what's acceptable by getting in trouble or being rewarded. They're actively told and taught. It might be through assemblies. It might be through intentional planned sessions that are in class, but also ad hoc ones. Encourage your staff to regularly have these conversations. A 5-minute conversation on something with your class where you really unpick why something isn't good or why something is good, why we shouldn't do certain things or why we should. And you really get into some detail and you make that a discussion. And then you say, right, this is something we need to work on. You might spend 5-10 minutes on that, maybe even longer, but you're going to save time rather than having to deal with little behavior issues 2 minutes here and there all the time. So have conversations in class, in assemblies, and of course, when you're dealing with individual behavior situations, you have conversations with the child. Don't just say, right, you've got this consequence, and then the child sits inside for playtime, or maybe even a reflection sheet. It sounds good, doesn't it? The children just write the same thing every time. Yeah, I did this. What should I do next time? Not do that. Say sorry. But actually speak to them, have a real one-to-one, and that restorative chat after the issue will go a long way. The second one is to always use collective language. So encourage your staff and make this a whole school thing where the language is always, we don't do that. That's not what we do here. I wouldn't speak to you like that. So don't talk to me like that. It's not the done thing here. And it's like broken record technique that you just need to be hearing all the time. We don't do that here. We do that here. We work hard. We don't give up. We don't speak to each other like that. And that collective language of what this school does, what we think is okay, also adds to that culture, okay? Because culture is shared, isn't it? So they have to feel that sense of this is what we do and this is what we don't do, yeah? So you're reinforcing expectations, but at the same time, you're reinforcing belonging. So there's that positive aspect of, this is what we do and this is why we do it, because we want it to be a safe place, an enjoyable place to come to. That sense of, we don't do that because if I allowed that, one day it's going to be you that suffers from that, right? And so I often have conversations with children who've done something aggressive, and in the moment they just want to say, but he did this, and you almost have to say, what would this school look like if we didn't correct that? What would this school look like if I said, oh, that's okay then? Well, whenever something like that happens, we'll let children hit. That wouldn't be a safe school. That'd be a chaotic school. And so you're using that collective language that talks about building, a culture, but also builds belonging. The third is, and I mentioned this, is to push for that independence. So if behavior only exists because the adults are there, or because of rewards, or because of the fear of consequences, that's kind of compliance. It's kind of just like extrinsic things. And it's not culture. It's not built in. And the goal is to have students who behave appropriately because that's the normal thing to do, right? Not because they're being watched, because that's how it is in this school. That's what we do. That's how we are. And of course, that has to be linked to consequences and rewards to some extent, because there's a lot of children who need that reminder. But ultimately, you're pushing for that. And you say that to the children. You say, why do we do these things? Because it's the right thing to do, not to avoid a consequence or to get a reward. And I remember when I would teach, particularly doing tests, I would talk to them and I'd say, why should you not copy someone on this test? And they would say, oh, because they might have the wrong answer. Okay, yeah. Or because you will think we know something and we don't know. Okay, yeah. But ultimately, why should you not cheat on that test? Because you shouldn't be a cheater. You don't want to be that person who is dishonest. You don't want to be a person who people don't want to sit near you because you cheat and copy their work. And so this is how you build this kind of, it's who you are and who you should want to be. And it comes in the assemblies, it comes through teacher conversation, it comes through those small sessions, so that we're constantly bringing children to think, I want to do the right thing. I want to be the person who does that. It's not linked to a consequence or a reward that they might be there to remind me. It's because there's this bigger picture of who we are at this school and who we want to be as people and in the future as young adults and in society. And so that's a really important one. And then the fourth one, and this is probably the hardest, is consistency. And I don't just mean an individual teacher's consistency, from lesson to lesson, from day to day. I mean that you want this to be a consistent thing across the school. So you need all your teachers to have bought into this. We all know that this is what we tolerate and this is what we don't. We're all using that inclusive language, that joint language. If there's noise outside your classroom, and I know I've done this, you could just close your door because there's noise and keep teaching. Whereas if every teacher in that school thought, whenever I hear that, I'm going to put my head out. I'm going to say, what's happening here? Eventually it becomes a culture that children don't do that in the corridor because teacher heads keep popping out to deal with it. So there's that collective responsibility where consistently across the school, all staff keep the same standard. And it's also about their own actions. So that consistency of how they act, how they behave, you have to manage that. If you snap at children, if you're sarcastic with children, it's going to be very difficult to then say, well, in this school, we don't speak unkindly. And they could actually turn around and say, well, you said this to me yesterday. And you don't want to give them that. You want to be able to say, I don't speak like that to you, so don't speak like that to me. We don't speak like that here. And for it to be true. So you also need that consistency of your own conduct and of your staff's professionalism. And that's why I say it's the hardest, because it's difficult to get everybody doing the same thing. But at least if you're conscious of it, then you speak to your staff about that and you regularly mention it and remind them and pull them up if need be. And obviously encourage them and compliment them if they're doing it. Because children don't just follow policy alone, they follow patterns, they follow examples, right? Actions speak louder than words. If you say, we don't do this thing, but they see you doing it, it obviously undermines what's being said. So as I mentioned, culture is going to exist in your school, whether you've actively designed it or not. So the only question is the current culture intentional? Or is it just what's happened, what's become the way your school is? If you want behavior to improve sustainably, don't just think about your systems and your sanctions, but ask, what is the culture we want to build? And what are we doing every day to reinforce that? Because everything you do in your school is either helping or hindering a culture. If children are picking up that they can do certain things or what they can't do, then that is culture. It's being picked up all the time. And a message is being sent to children about what's okay and what's not. So hopefully that's of some use. Now, if you are a school leader and you want more support with this, I do a longer, more in-depth session all about that culture. It can be 45 minutes to an hour. I can do that to whole staff in person or online, and details I'll put them in the description. You can book a call through my website, or you can just send me a message on Instagram. So if you want more support with that, that's the type of thing I work directly with schools on. Hope it was useful. See you in the next video.